Hi, everyone. Welcome again to Ivy English. I'm Bruce.
I'm Angela.
And I'm Wesley.
Today we have in-depth news. If something is in-depth, it's complete, full. And we're going to be talking about one of my favorite things in the whole world, maple syrup, in the article called High Demand and Low Supply Lead to Maple Syrup Concerns.
Maple syrup is basically concentrated tree juice. You know that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sweet tree juice.
Sweet, delicious concentrated tree juice.
对，其实是树的一种汁液。好，那我们的中文标题是枫糖浆短缺，加拿大释出紧急储备。
Okay, I'll read through the whole article first, and then we'll go back, as we always do, sentence by sentence, both in English and Chinese, so that you will understand completely what all this English means. A favorite topping for pancakes, porridge, and so much more. Maple syrup is a kitchen essential for many households. Demand for the sweet liquid has increased dramatically over the past year, thanks in part to the increased cooking many people have been doing during pandemic-related lockdowns. However, a decrease in maple syrup production has caused a shortfall in supply, causing the world's largest group of maple syrup producers to release some of their emergency reserve. The Quebec Maple Syrup Producers, or QMSP, is often referred to as the OPEC of the maple syrup industry. This is due to the large amount of the global supply it is responsible for producing. Around 3/4 of all maple syrup is supplied by QMSP. Unfortunately, because of the weather conditions during the previous spring harvest season, the amount of maple syrup produced dropped significantly. Maple syrup production is highly dependent on the weather. Maple trees can only be tapped when temperatures are below freezing at night and slightly above freezing during the day. Unusually warm weather this past spring ended up limiting the number of days when maple syrup could be collected. Fortunately, QMSP maintains a large reserve of maple syrup for just this type of situation. The group announced that it will be releasing 22 million kilograms of syrup to meet the shortage. So, fans of this sweet treat have no need to worry. There will be enough maple syrup for our muffins, teas, and more.
That's good news. So, a favorite topping for pancakes, porridge, and so much more, maple syrup is a kitchen essential for many households. Pancakes, you guys know. What is porridge? Porridge and dough are not quite the same thing. But porridge is basically a grain-based soup.
Especially oats.
Yeah, basically oats. In our household, we wouldn't use maple syrup for porridge. Is that a thing you guys would do?
No. We didn't, my parents didn't make porridge.
Really?
Pancakes, yes, but not porridge.
Porridge was basically the everyday thing. And we would make jokes about gruel, of course. But then pancakes was like the special Saturday night dinner that my dad would do for us. He made pancakes the size of your head, the size of your plate. It was fantastic. So pancakes and porridge, these are things you can put maple syrup on. You can put maple syrup on anything, I'm just going to say. And it's a kitchen essential. An essential thing is something that you must have. You can actually call it a must-have for your household, a must-have for your kitchen.
好，所以我们一开始呢是一个分词片语，省略的那个 being 它是个 favorite topping 就是加在食物上面的配料。好，那尤其是什么样的食物呢？ Pancakes 就是煎饼，那 porridge 就是燕麦粥或者是麦片粥，还有 so much more 还有好多好多的食物都可以加这个东西。好，那这东西是什么东西呢？这个分词构句之后 主要子句的主词就是这个东西，那也就是 maple syrup， 就是这个枫糖浆啊。那它是一个怎么样 kitchen essential， 是个厨房里面 essential 就是必须的东西，在这也是名词必需品。那这是对很多的家庭来讲，它是厨房一定要有的东西啊。那 households 就是家庭，它原来的意思是指同住的一家人或者是同住的一群人，那大致上它的意思跟家庭是差不多的。
Demand for the sweet liquid has increased dramatically over the past year, thanks in part to the increased cooking many people have been doing during pandemic-related lockdowns. In business, we often talk about supply and demand. Supply is how much you have, and demand is how much of it people want. Well, it's a sweet liquid. Most people like sweets. Now, this liquid is not like water. It's very, very thick, and it's also very, very sticky. So you should be careful when you're using maple syrup. Too much of it will taste too sweet. And if you spill some, whatever it spills on is going to stick. So be careful with it. But it's so sweet, so delicious, that its demand has increased dramatically. So much, it's even hard to describe how much, over the past year, in the last 12 months, thanks, in part, not only, but some part, to the increased cooking many people have been doing during pandemic-related lockdowns. A lockdown is when you're not supposed to leave your home, or only one person can leave every other day for 2 hours to go shopping. So it's locked down. People are prevented from freely walking about and going wherever they want to go. So during that kind of situation, many people have returned to cooking. Instead of going out because you can't to a restaurant or ordering from a company that prepares food and sends it to your home, you better know how to cook something because you won't be very happy during a lockdown.
好，所以 demand 就是需求 ，for 就是对于什么的需求，对于 the sweet liquid 就指的就是这个枫糖浆。对于枫糖浆这个甜甜的液体的需求呢 has increased 增加了，而且是 dramatically 就是剧烈地增加，大幅度地增加 over the past year 在过去这一年呢，对于枫糖浆的需求大幅的增加。那 thanks to 就是由于那也可以翻成多亏了。In part 就是部分，所以 thanks in part to 就是部分的原因。为什么大量增加呢？部分原因是因为 the increased cooking 就是已经增加了的 cooking 就是下厨所以越来越多人下厨了那这个 cooking 是怎么样？这个 increased cooking 是 many people have been doing 所以这个 cooking 是这个 do 的受词，所以换句话说 many people have been doing a lot of cooking 的意思，就很多人就常常在做饭了，而且是什么时候呢？主要是因为什么时候呢？是因为在这个 during 在这个 pandemic related 跟这个疫情有关的这些 lockdowns 封城或者是隔离期间，因为封城或隔离的很多人被迫必须要在家里面多煮东西多做东西，所以对于枫糖浆的消耗量也增加了。
However, a decrease in maple syrup production. A decrease is the opposite of an increase. Decrease means it's much lower, it's going down. So there's much less maple syrup production, and this has caused a shortfall in supply. A shortfall means you fall short. It means you don't have enough. There's not enough supply of maple syrup, causing the world's largest group of maple syrup producers to release some of their emergency reserve. And I have a picture now of a secret lair with a giant tank of maple syrup in it. And they're like, okay, boys, release the backup. And then a truck backs up to the tank or whatever. Anyways, if you release some of their emergency reserve, they clearly have a backup plan for a shortfall in supply. Leading to my question is, how long can you store maple syrup in a reserve? Is it like honey where it's basically infinite?
It's like honey.
Indefinite?
You reheat it and it resumes its original state.
Sugar is a preservative, so it stays around.
Yeah.
So, dude, I want to find out where the secret reserve supply is so I can go tap in, but okay.
Yeah, 好，所以呢，但是呢 a decrease 就是一个减少哈，然后 in 在哪方面的减少呢？在这个 maple syrup production 在枫糖浆的生产上面的减少，那 has caused 造成了 a shortfall 就是一个短缺，一个 shortage 啊 shortage 啊，或者是一个 deficiency 就不足啊 deficiency 啊，所以呢它造成了一个 shortfall 一个短缺，然后在哪方面的短缺一样加个 in， 然后呢 supply 也就是在它供应方面产生了短缺，然后这件事情造成什么结果呢？用一个分词构句放在这里 causing the world's largest group， 它造成的结果是这个世界上最大的一个集团，什么的集团呢？就是 maple syrup producers， 这个生产商就是枫糖浆生产商啊，全世界最大的枫糖浆生产商的这个集团呢，造成了让他们怎么样？让他们 to 去做这件事情，做什么事呢？ to release 就是释放，放出来了 some of their 他们的emergency reserve 他们的应急的储备库存里面啊，让他们把它释放出来。那这个 reserve 就是储备的物资哈，像我们常常讲 oil reserves 就是这个原油的储备。
Well, I'm glad you mentioned oil reserve because the next paragraph, first sentence, talks about that. The Quebec Maple Syrup Producers, or QMSP, is often referred to as the OPEC of the maple syrup industry. OPEC is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Petroleum, more commonly known as oil, and when that is refined, it becomes gasoline, kerosene, and some other cooking or sources of power for engines. The QMSP is sort of the OPEC of the maple syrup world. You've probably seen OPEC or heard the term before. And Quebec is a province in Canada. It's French-speaking, and they pronounce their province as Quebec, and they know immediately if you don't know French, because most of us English speakers will say Quebec, and they immediately know that you're not from the province or its beautiful capital city, Montreal. So the maple syrup producers of Quebec have a huge amount of maple syrup, just as OPEC has a fantastically large supply of oil.
好，那我们看到这个地方 QMSP 啊，就是魁北克枫糖浆生产商啊，那这个组织呢 is often referred to as 就是常常被称为什么？他们常常被称为呢这个 the maple syrup industry 就是枫糖浆业界的什么的 OPEC。那 OPEC 我们知道就是石油输出国组织，它是通常会统一或者协调会员国他们的石油政策还有价格。好，所以换句话说，在石油业有这个石油输出国组织，那在枫糖浆生产界呢有这个 QMSP 啊，他们都是举足轻重啊，有决定性的政策影响力。
This is due to the large amount of the global supply it is responsible for producing. So they have quite the percentage of maple syrup production under their control, which is why they're compared to OPEC.
好，那 this is due to 这个是很好用的一个常见的 chunk 啊，就是这是因为 this is due to 这是由于什么呢？为什么会把它比喻成为枫糖业界的这个 OPEC 呢？这是由于 the large amount of 啊，就是大量的 the global supply 全球的供应量，这里指的是枫糖浆的供应量。然后呢 that it is responsible for producing 啊，这个 that 省略掉了啊，所以它为什么会被称为枫糖业界的 OPEC 呢？那是因为它负责生产的啊 it is responsible for producing 它所负责生产的那个大量的全球供应量，所以它生产很多很多的大量的枫糖浆供应全世界，所以它的重要性在枫糖业界就跟 OPEC 在石油业界是一样的。
Okay, we just talked about the large amount of the global supply, and the next sentence tells us how large. Around 3/4, 3/4, 75% of all maple syrup is supplied by QMSP. That is a larger amount than OPEC controls of the planet's oil.
I was thinking that myself.
Oh, yeah. Much.
所以呢，所有枫糖浆大约有3%around 3/4 of all maple syrup 是由 QMSP 所供应的。那这个比这个石油输出国组织所控制的这个油的供应量还要多。
I'm moving to Montreal.
You just need to get into that OPEC of maple syrup. Get a job there. Then your supply is secure.
I can teach. If they're French speaking, I can teach them English.
I don't think they want to learn English, or they would
That's right.
be Quebecians. Quebecois, sorry.
Yes.
So now we're switching back to the main topic, which is that there's a low amount of maple syrup in the world today, and this is the reason why. Unfortunately, because of the weather conditions during the previous spring harvest season, so during the harvest season, there was bad weather for harvesting. So the amount of maple syrup produced dropped significantly. There was a significantly smaller amount of maple syrup produced.
Unfortunately, 不幸地 because of 因为 the weather conditions 就是气候的状况，那注意呢 condition 要加 s the weather conditions 气候状况。由于气候的状况，什么时候气候的状况呢？ During the previous spring harvest season 在这个前一年的这个春天的采收季节 harvest season 由于前一年的这个先前的这个春天采收季节气候状况不佳的意思导致怎么样呢 The amount of maple syrup produced 就是 the amount of maple syrup that was produced 所生产出来的枫糖浆的量怎么样 dropped significantly dropped 就是下降或者是掉落然后呢 significantly 是显著好所以呢换句话说它们产量显著地下降
Okay, we just heard that the weather conditions during the previous spring harvest season resulted in less maple syrup being produced, and the first sentence of the next paragraph leads us on in this direction. Maple syrup production is highly dependent on the weather. Those are the weather conditions we just mentioned.
好 to be highly dependent on something 就是表示高度依赖某个东西，那在这里它是高度依赖天气所以它这里谈到枫糖浆的生产 maple syrup production is highly dependent on the weather 是高度依赖天气。
Maple trees can only be tapped when temperatures are below freezing at night and slightly above freezing during the day. What does it mean that they can be tapped? Are we knocking on them gently? No. To tap something is to stick a tube into it such that material can come out. So you can tap a beer keg, you can tap a cask of wine, or you can tap a maple tree. And so they tap them. They literally stick a tube into the tree, and the sap from the tree will come out. But this only happens when a specific set of temperature conditions are right. And so they have to be below freezing at night. They have to freeze at night, but be above freezing during the day. So it has to have this specific range of temperatures, and that is when trees send their sap through the wood in such a way that it's harvestable and is good maple syrup material. It's not maple syrup coming out of the tree. You take that tree juice and you boil it. You boil the heck out of it until most of the water is gone, and what's remaining is the maple syrup.
好，所以呢，这个枫树它们只能够被 tapped 那 tapped 在这里呢就是指插根管子进去把里面的这个内容物也就是通常的液体让它流出来那在这里特别是指说在树上刻个痕那取这个枫树的汁液所以呢你要取汁取这个枫树的汁液只能够在什么时候呢 when temperatures are 当那个温度是怎么样 below freezing 就是低于冰点 at night 晚上要低于冰点然后呢 during the day 相对于 at night 在白天呢那个温度必须是 slightly above freezing 稍微比这个冰点高一点高太多也不行所以它对于温度或者对于气候的要求是很严的
Unusually warm weather this past spring ended up limiting the number of days when maple syrup could be collected. So the temperature was higher than above freezing, and this does not meet the weather conditions that are favorable to tapping a maple tree and having the sap run out of it.
好 sap 就是树枝，好，树的枝叶 SAP 好。那其实刚刚这个 Angela 老师有提到，不是说你从这个枫树里面接出来就是枫糖浆了哈，是接出来那个树枝那个 sap 你还要去煮啊，经过一些手续啊，它才会变成枫糖浆。好，那我们看到这个地方这个句子，他说 unusually warm weather 就是不寻常的温暖的气候啊 ，this past spring 啊，这个温度太高了，而且是不寻常的高。那 ended up 就是结果造成了什么事情，那后面通常要加一个 VING， 所以由这个不寻常的高温造成什么事情呢？造成了 limiting 限制了 the number of days 这个天数 when maple syrup could be collected， 就是你可以采集枫糖这个树液的这个时间或者那个日子呢被限制住了，因为天气太热了。那 collect 就是采集的意思。
Fortunately, QMSP maintains a large reserve of maple syrup for just this type of situation.
So, a reserve of something is something that you've kept and stored as a backup, basically. A reserve is a backup. And the reason they do this, they really are the OPEC of the maple syrup world. They do this in order to prevent overproduction in some years, because when you overproduce something, the price goes down. When you underproduce something, the price goes up. So in order to maintain consistent prices, which is basically the point of doing a large group like this, is so that they can have this reserve, basically. So they release maple syrup in poor years to keep the price consistent and to keep their suppliers happy. To keep their supply chain happy. They are the supplier.
我们看到这地方他讲这个 fortunately 就是幸运的是所幸这个 QMSP maintains 他们维持了 a large reserve of 就是大量的库存就是维持大量的这个枫糖浆的这个库存for just this type of situation 就是为了这种状况他们就有大量的库存。因为刚刚 Angela 老师有提到说这个有的时候他们可能产量过剩，那价钱就会往下掉，所以他们就会产量过剩的时候呢，他们就把其中的一部分把它储存起来，那等到像这种产量不够的时候，他们就可以把这之前储存的拿出来那这样子的话他们的价格就会比较平稳。那这个主要就跟那个OPEC 做的事情很像他们主要就是调整稳定那个价格。
The group announced that it will be releasing 22 million kilograms of syrup to meet the shortage. I hate it when they put statistics like this in here. Who can imagine 22 million kilograms? Wouldn't it be easier to imagine 22,000 metric tons? Because that's what it's equal to. I mean, if you do that with kilograms, you might as well do ounces, a billion ounces of something. It's meaningless. Use the larger unit in order to express your statistics.
好，那这个地方讲到说这个集团呢宣布了，他们将会释放出来2200万公斤的这个枫糖浆那这个地方其实你应该用更大一点的数字，因为2200万就比较难想象，你如果把它转成吨的话数字就会小一点，那这写作上通常我们会建议大家这样做。然后他们释放出这样多的枫糖浆，目的是要 meet the shortage， 就是要弥补这个不足那 meet 它常常可以用来表达满足或者是达到符合某一个要求，某一个期望，某一个需求某一个目标等等的。那在我们的杂志上面有补充很多很常见的 meet 的用法例如 meet a need 就是符合满足一个需求或者 meet a goal 就是达到或者符合什么样的目标另外还有很多个，那各位可以看看我们杂志上面补充的顺便一起学起来，这样子效率会更好。
So, fans of this sweet treat have no need to worry. You're cool. There will be enough maple syrup for our muffins, teas, and more. No worries.
好，所以呢 fans 就是粉丝所以这个sweet treat 就这个甜甜的美食treat 在这里可以翻译成为美食所以这个甜甜的美食的粉丝们 have no need to worry 不用担心没有担心的必要，因为 there will be enough maple syrup 会有足够的枫糖浆来做我们的 muffins, teas 泡茶，然后呢 and more 还有更多的。
So we have some questions here for you, number one of which is, what is a reason given for the increased demand for maple syrup?
好，所以枫糖浆需求增加的原因，这里指出来有什么样的原因呢？
The answer is C. People started to cook more frequently at home during the pandemic.
答案是 C， 他有提到在疫情期间，人们更常在家做饭。
Number 2. Why is the QMSP often called the OPEC of the maple syrup industry?
好，为什么 QMSP 常常被称为枫糖浆界的龙头，或者是这个像 OPEC 那样重要的一个组织那样的角色呢？
The answer is A. They produce approximately 75% of the world's maple syrup supply.
答案是 A 啊，因为他们生产了将近 75% 的世界枫糖浆的供应量。
And number 3, what is necessary for people to collect maple syrup?
人们需要用什么来采收枫糖浆呢？
The answer is D. Daytime temperatures must be above 0 degrees Celsius and nighttime temperatures below 0 degrees Celsius.
好，所以这不是说需要什么来采收，而是需要什么样的条件来采收。好，那我们看到正确的答案是 D， 白天温度必须在0度C 以上，那夜间温度呢必须低于0度C。
Well, that's it for today's lesson, but fear not, we will be back tomorrow for you. Until then, bye-bye.